everyone, welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the newest patch 11.5 and all the changes that come with it. After the chaos of the last patch, 11.5 is much tamer. Essentially the goal is to tone down the outliers of the meta, meaning that the stronger comps get pulled down a bit and the weaker performing strategies and champions get pulled up slightly. This should result in a well-rounded meta. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off the patch review, there's a few system changes to talk about. First off, it's worth noting the changes they're bringing to the debuff system. There's always been a slight issue in TFT where knowing whether certain things stack or not, specifically when it comes to debuffs. To address that, they're making it clear that any debuff of the same type will no longer stack together. What this means is when two debuffs interact with one another, like, say, armor shredding, it will prioritize the strongest debuff as long as it's active. This is a nice and intuitive change for players to understand moving forward. That said, it wasn't that common of an occurrence where debuff stacking was even happening, so this change won't impact the current balance by much. Overall, it's just a good change to the debuff system as a whole, especially for future sets. After the Chosen drop rates changed last patch, we've seen a bit of a return to going all in on 7 in hopes of high rolling a 4-cost Chosen. The balance team has recognized this as an issue, so to roll back the frequency of that happening, they're lowering the level 7 roll odds of 4-cost Chosen down to 2% from 5%. That extra 3% will instead go towards 3 costs, which moves up to 58% from 55%. While this is a nice adjustment, it still doesn't fully address high rolling a 4-cost Chosen at 7. But the balance team has made it clear that they like the possibility of players having those high roll moments, so it's unlikely we'll get any drastic changes in the future. Let's move on now to trait changes. There's not many this week since 11.4 had a lot of nerfs and buffs. Up first, we have Keeper receiving a nerf to the amount of shields they get for the 6-piece trait. It's going from 275 down to 250. It's only an adjustment of 25, so it's unlikely to matter too much, but still, a nerf is a nerf. The nerf is in response to the 6 Keeper composition that popped up near the end of 11.4. That composition used 6 Keeper with Kennen and Zaya being the item holders. It wasn't that strong of a build, so targeting it with a nerf does feel a bit odd, but again, it's only by 25, so it won't cause too many issues for it. The only other trait receiving any changes for patch 11.5 is Vanguard. The first nerf is to the armor that 8 Vanguard receive, as it's going from 1100 to 800. It's a significant drop, but in reality, it's not going to affect the meta at all. Practically no one ever plays 8 Vanguard, even in the Vanguard Mystic composition. All this change really does is discourage players from exploring the option of hitting 8 Vanguard. And the other nerf to Vanguard is to the magic resist that they gain. These are much more impactful as the magic resist is going from 20, 40, 70, 100 to 10, 25, 50, 80. It's not too surprising that they want to lower how strong Vanguards are as frontline champions since they, at least in the current meta, outperform both Brawlers and Elderwoods. The reason that Vanguard is so much better is having a flat increase to both armor and magic resist makes Vanguard champions much harder to kill in the front line. Brawlers only gain health, which doesn't scale well in the late game, and Elderwoods need time to ramp up in a fight. Thus, we're in a meta where most players are trying to fit in a few Vanguards as their frontline, with Sejuani and Aatrox being the most contested. By nerfing the magic resist, it should make Vanguard units easier to counter, which in turn lessens the need for items like Last Whisper. These are subtle nudges to the meta that will have a lasting impact, though ultimately due to the amount of crowd control Sejuani, Aatrox, and Ornn have, they are likely to remain heavily contested. Well, that's all for traits. Let's now move on to champion changes. Starting off the champion changes, we have buffs to Diana. It seems like Diana is difficult to find the perfect balance for, as she is constantly being adjusted each patch. They nerfed her quite a lot in 11.4, especially in how viable she was as a 3-star unit. It seems they're pulling back on those nerfs slightly as her ability shield amount is being increased to 200, 300, 450 from 175, 250, 350. As this is only directed towards the shield she receives, it is not going to push her back into the spotlight like she was in previous metas. But it will help her survive longer in a fight, which does boost her early game. And if players really want to 3-star her, then having an extra 100 shields is quite good, but without any alterations to her damage, she won't feel anywhere near as strong as she did in the past. Next, we have another champion that was heavily nerfed in 11.4, Nasus. Keep in mind that Nasus also received a minor buff in the B patch for 11.4 that lowered his total mana from 80 to 70. Along with the change, they're buffing his damage at tier 3 to 850 from 750. When you take both of these buffs into account, it does look like Nasus may be worth pursuing again as a 3-star reroll carry. The reason for that is, well, the damage nerf was essentially reversed from 11.4, and with his mana only 10 higher than it originally was. So if you see any players rerolling Nasus, expect it to feel somewhat similar to how Nasus was prior to 11.3. Now we move on to another 1-cost champion that was nerfed, got buffed in the B patch, and will be buffed again in 11.5, Nidalee. Nidalee received a buff to her ability damage in the B patch as it went from 100, 150, 250 to 100, 175, 300. It did feel like a necessary buff because Nidalee was, well, quite bad after the heavy nerf she received initially. With those damage buffs in mind, they also lowered her total mana to 60 from 70. Looking at both of those changes, you may wonder, is Nidalee back as a 3-star carry? Well, likely not. This is because she got a fairly significant chunk of her damage through her spear. Even though her spear gains more damage the further it travels, having the base damage essentially cut in half makes it much weaker overall. Plus, Warlord was nerfed as well, meaning she won't gain as many stats. That said, we're not suggesting that Nidalee 3 can't be used as a viable carry, as these are decent enough buffs to make some players try to reroll for her. What these buffs mean for the majority of players is that Nidalee is back to being a useful 2-star champion for Stage 2, and may be worth keeping around for parts of Stage 3. The last 1-cost champion is Yasuo, as he's receiving a slight buff after getting heavily nerfed in 11.4. The attack damage ratio for his ability is going to 190, 200 to 10% from 180, 175, 190%. Interestingly, this puts him almost back to the same stats he had before the nerfs. He's actually better at level 1. More than likely, this means Yasuo is back to being a powerhouse chosen for Stage 2, and Duelists should be more viable if you high roll a bunch of early Yasuos and hit Yasuo 3 during Stage 3. On to 2-cost champions, beginning with Janna. Oddly enough, they are nerfing Janna as their shields are going down to 250, 275, 350 from 250, 300, 400. This is a strange nerf as Janna, while strong early on in the game, is not oppressive to play against. Sure, an early Janna 2 can result in win streaking, but so can a lot of early 2-cost 2-star champions. Overall, Janna will still be good early game like she has been, but it feels like an unnecessary nerf. The other 2-cost receiving adjustments is Lulu, as her mana is going from 80, 150 to 75, 140. The ratio of how much mana it takes for her to get her first cast off remains roughly the same, but the second cast will now happen slightly quicker. This is a good way to buff Lulu since the rate at which she casts her first ability feels like it's in a healthy spot, so helping the second cast get off a bit easier is good without making Lulu too strong. Since we're touching on Elderwood mages, let's talk about Veigar. Veigar is having his damage increased to 500, 650, 1000 from 450, 600, 900. Honestly, this change is scary as Veigar 3 isn't terrible in the current meta, though it is much harder to make him work as a carry compared to Aurelion Sol. The buff may end up being too much or may need a small adjustment later, but for now, keep an eye out for players trying to hit Veigar 3. Akali is receiving a buff to her ability damage as it's going up to 200, 275, 450 from 175, 250, 400. While this is a nice little bump up in damage for Akali, it didn't really feel all that necessary as she was already doing well as a mid-game carry. Sure, her scaling wasn't the greatest, so this buff does help with that, but Akali didn't seem to be underperforming in the meta. One thing to keep an eye out for is the return of 4 ninja composition, as Kennen received decent buffs last patch, and now Akali is being buffed this patch. May not be enough for that comp to return into the meta, but it's certainly a possibility. The last 3 cost changes are to Sivir, who is losing some bonus attack damage on her ability. The damage is going down to 100, 200, 350 from 100, 200, 400. This is a small nerf to lower how good Sivir 3 is, since we've been seeing her do really well at the end of 11.4. Really, it likely wasn't that necessary because Sivir wasn't unbeatable, but it's also not too harsh of a nerf, so she will still remain a viable option if pursued. The only major change to 4 costs is to Sejuani, as her stun duration is going from 2.536 seconds to 2.58 seconds. Ignore the 3-star changes, as the only relevant nerfs here is a drop of 0.5 seconds at tiers 1 and 2. This is a necessary nerf, as Sejuani is clearly the best Vanguard, though it's only by 0.5 seconds, so expect her still to remain a top choice. Samira seems to rely a bit too much on Deathblade, so they're altering how her ability functions. It will now start at 15, 25, 40 damage, while scaling is going down to 30, 40, 60 from 50, 60, 80% to compensate the starting damage buff. Basically, what this does is open up a few more item choices when using Samira instead of having to rely so much on Deathblade. Overall, it's likely a good change, though we may need to see further adjustments. And the last champion being changed is Yone, as his mana cost for Unforgotten is going from 20 to 10. Yone has continually been buffed each patch, so really at this point he should be one of the stronger 5-cost champions in the late game. Let's now move on to item changes for patch 11.5. Up first is a small nerf to Deathblade, as the starting stacks are going from 4 to 3. No one should be surprised by this, as starting with 40 extra damage was a lot, so reducing it down to 30 is a necessary nerf. After this change, along with one done in 11.4, Deathblade should be in a balanced spot. Static Shiv is underperforming to no one's surprise. To help with that, they're buffing the damage from 60 to 65, which is unlikely to make much of a difference. At this point, they should really just scrap Shiv entirely and design a new item to replace it in Set 5. And the last item change is to Trap Claw, as the stun now happens significantly faster. This, along with the increased cast time on the second cast for Aurelion Soul, means Trap Claw is now a proper counter to Aurelion Soul. These changes are a bit niche, but it is nice having additional options for playing against Aurelion. Before we end, we've got two specific bug fixes to address that may impact Tryndamere in 11.5. First, they fix the bug where his spinning splash damage would benefit from the attack damage bonus, and second, they fix Ruden's consuming a stack of the bonus damage to deal extra damage. Both of these bug fixes may result in Tryndamere performing worse than he was in 11.4, and may have been the reason as to why he was performing so well. But being bugs, it does mean they weren't guaranteed to happen all the time, so it may not end up mattering that much. Basically, if Tryndamere feels weaker at all, these bug fixes are the reason. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. All in all, the changes in this patch should help the meta settle in a healthy and diverse spot. Let us know in the comment section below which change you enjoyed the most. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.